Hello and welcome to Miniature Adventures. I'm Big Lee, and this week I want to talk about our battle blunders and owning the mistake. So this sort of follows on from the last few weeks where the talking points have been about failure on the battlefield and enjoying the game even in defeat. But this week I want to ask, what do you do when you make a mistake? And by this I mean, what do you do when you get a rule wrong and only realise mid-game? There are various options available to the wargamer, and what you choose may depend on the setting and who you're playing with. So the correct response mid-competition game, for instance, will be very different to making the same error while playing solo or with a group of very close friends. As with the effect of the error, was it in your favour or did it give the other side an advantage they shouldn't have had? It's a tricky subject, and putting aside deliberate cheating, because of course none of you lovely viewers would do that, of course you wouldn't, I think this is a topic that warrants a little bit of discussion. So option one is to basically just style it out and hope that no one notices your blunder, maybe quietly correcting yourself going forwards. And personally I'm not in favour of this one, simply because if no one noticed, there's a learning opportunity there that's being missed by everyone who was taking part. And also, even if it was unintentional, keeping it to yourself could be considered cheating, especially if it's spotted later in the game. Of course, the reaction of your opponent may vary depending on who has the advantage, but nonetheless, it's less than sporting and may not go down so well with your regular opponents. The second option, and the one I guess is the more palatable of the options, is just simple honesty. At the earliest opportunity, correct the record and play with the correct rule going forwards. Both sides could agree to ignore what took place earlier in the battle and ignore any impact on the game and just put it down as the fog of war. Of course, this would need all parties involved to agree and would require a degree of good humour and trust to handle diplomatically. The benefit of this approach is that everyone learns from this example, not least that you are an honest player and ready to own up to your mistakes. It may be embarrassing to announce that you have blundered, but if nobody else noticed, then don't feel so bad about it. Alternatively, if your opponent spots a mistake and in your understanding of the rules, the gentlemanly thing to do is apologise and take it on the chin. Again, everyone learns a lesson, not least what a fine chap you are. The third option is a variation on option 2, and in my humble opinion should be used with caution. First you correct the record, but between you and your opponent you try to undo the effects of the mistake if possible. So backtracking things like movement, returning casualties to a unit, there would be good examples of being able to backtrack the effects of forgetting a rule, for instance. However, it gets more tricky the bigger the change and the further back in the game it occurred. Correcting a mistake from the previous turn is a darn sight easier than one that occurred 3 or 4 turns ago, not least because no one around the table will be able to agree exactly what happened and what needs to be done to correct it. You would also have to be a bit of a chaos theory expert to work out the impact of a mistake from several turns ago. Did that missed movement mean other units reacted differently, or had the battle progressed largely as it would have done if the error had not been made? It's anybody's answer there. I mean, answering a question like that and agreeing on a course of action could drive everyone mad, and while you're trying to unravel the impact, the game isn't being played and the fun of the game is just being drained away. In extremis, there is option 4. If the mistake is so huge and the ramifications are completely game changing, you could just reset the game and start again. But again, this comes with a caveat. This is only really an option if it's feasible to do so. And by that I mean, is there time to reset everything up and restart the game? And I'm guessing that, that may be an option for competition games, but I don't know. I've never played those, so I don't really know what the relevant conventions or rules are in that sort of scenario. So as usual, I'd love to know how you handle mistakes mid-game. Do you prefer to keep it to yourself on the assumption that if your opponent doesn't know the rules enough to call you out on it, it's all's fair and nothing more? Or do you prefer honesty amongst your gaming group, owning the mistake or being gracious in correction so all learn from the experience? Or do you favour restarting a game from scratch, or just abandoning the game if a significant mistake is identified? And of course, I would be interested to know how errors are adjudicated and handled in tournaments. As I say, I've never done them, so I'd be very interested to hear that. So please let me know in the comments section below. So time for a hobby update. Last week I mentioned a poll that I had put on the community tab asking for your feedback on what types of videos you'd like me to make more of. So these are the supplementary videos that I occasionally put out in addition to the talking points. Thank you to everyone who's contributed. It will definitely help shape the direction of the channel going forward. At the time of making this video, I'd had over 120 responses and with what I think is a very clear result. For instance, a third of all respondents said they were interested in seeing more rules reviews and flip-throughs. So hopefully you enjoyed the review I did on They Died for Glory that came out on Friday. I have a few more rules that I'd like to review and I'll be working on these over the next few weeks and months. However, 44% of respondents said they'd like to see more of my short quick strike battle reports. Now I find this quite interesting because there are a lot of very long and very detailed battle reports available on YouTube and they're brilliant, but there are not many short bite-sized battle reports. Now a couple of years ago the Little Wars TV group promoted the idea of the quick strike battle report, which I really liked the format, and these are self-contained after action videos under 10 minutes long that includes the introduction and a conclusion. Now I've made a few of these and I think they're some of the best videos I've done. I certainly really enjoyed making them, but they are very intensive to make. You know, they take a lot of effort, but they also, you know, they do require a lot of preparation and planning to film, you know, while simultaneously trying to play a game. However, I do have an alternative resource that could enable me to produce many more quick strike battle reports. Now my blog has been around for over 15 years and during that time I've written hundreds of battle reports illustrated with pictures that I've taken. Some of these battle raps could be turned into after action videos, the slideshows of the many pictures I take during the games, many of which are not used on the blog and so have never been seen before. The first of these revisited games to get the quick strike treatment is a game of Chain of Command which I played in 2020, and this will be coming out on next Friday. Now I've already started work on turning yet another game into a video, and if these prove successful there are hundreds more examples that I can choose from. Now I've also been preparing for Salute that's happening in a couple of weeks time, so I've been making lists of the games that I particularly want to see, traders that I absolutely must not miss, and of course a shopping list. I have to admit the thought of the pain that's going to emanate from my dodgy knees and my feet is echoing backwards through time, but I think it will be worth it. The plan is to try and get the video done as soon as possible, preferably on the same day, but you know, with over 90 games, compiling that video quickly may be challenging. We'll see how I feel when I get back from Salute. At the latest I'll get it done on the Sunday, but the earlier the better. Now I believe that Ray will be organising the usual blogger gathering sometime around lunchtime, but I don't know any of the details yet. I will be there, so if you want to say hello and don't see him in amongst the throng, please drop by for the meet up and say hello. So we've got time for a book review. This week I want to give a very brief review of For Calls and Comrades by James McPherson, which was published in 1997. Now I probably first read this book in the early noughties, I think it was, and it stood out then, as it does now, as a great book that has stayed with me ever since. For Calls and Comrades does not try to explain the reasons for the American Civil War, but instead looks inside each soldier on both sides and asks what made them fight. The thing I liked most about this book is that it was filled with the voices of the men that took up arms. Literacy was fairly high amongst ordinary soldiers and many were prolific letter writers. Those communications that have survived paint a really vivid picture of life and death amongst the common soldiers. You know, a generation or two earlier, literacy was most common in the educated officer classes, but by the 1860s, many ordinary men and women could read and write. And this has provided historians with a fascinating window into the life of ordinary soldiers on both sides in the Civil War, how they lived, what they fought, and what their daily concerns were. And McPherson tries to answer a very important question in this book. How does an army hold itself together in the face of extreme hardship and the grinding attrition of high combat casualty rates? What is it that stops an army's soldiers from just packing up and going home? This question is all the more relevant when looked at when you're looking at the armies of the South, who consist largely of volunteers. Unlike the North, which raised new conscripts throughout the war, many Southern soldiers saw service until death or defeat brought that service to an end. So why did they fight so persistently through such a long and bitter war that pitted American state against American state? And in the book it's quite clear that on one level they fought for the friend standing next to them, they fought for families back home, they fought for honour and a sense of duty. But the examples of letters described in the book also make it clear that many Civil War soldiers did indeed fight for ideological motives. Literate soldiers didn't just write letters, they eagerly read newspapers and consumed the political narratives of their leaders. And as soldiers of any era will attest, much of soldiering is boredom, marching and waiting. So they had plenty of time on their hands to discuss politics as well as complain about the food and lack of equipment. It should perhaps come as no surprise that as the war progressed, the letters of ordinary soldiers reflect a growing commitment to the ideology rather than the disillusionment or exhaustion that we might expect when looking back simply at casualty rates and battle after battle. For Northern troops, the intellectual narrative of politicians like Abraham Lincoln fed into their consciousness. It shaped the way they thought about the war and the necessity of victory. For those in the South, victory became an existential necessity after so much blood had been spilled. McPherson concludes that religion, honour and duty played a great part in holding these men together, but so did politics and ideology. But perhaps more surprising is that soldiers of both sides considered themselves to be fighting for generally the same principles of liberty, freedom, justice and patriotism. Perhaps the real tragedy of the Civil War is that, politics aside, the common soldiers of both sides were not really as different as you might think. And so for that very reason, I just found this a fascinating book to read, and as I say, it still sticks in my memory all these years later. So that's it for this week. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Please join the conversation in the comments below. And of course, if you did enjoy the video, please like, subscribe and share. And if you want to keep up to date with weekly content from this channel, please tap the bell notification icon. So until next week, stay safe, keep gaming, and of course, keep rolling high.